As we approach UTEP's 100th birthday in 2014, a milestone we anticipate with great pride and excitement, we consider this to be a perfect time for a significant transition in the name of this lecture series. So we're going to bid farewell to our popular and highly successful Millennium Lecture Series, and we're going to shift to a Centennial Lecture Series. And so you are here at the inaugural Centennial Lecture. And with this new series, we're going to be focusing on and contemplating UTEP's second 100 years, moving into that phase of our development by welcoming distinguished speakers from a broad range of disciplines to our campus to share their perspectives on contemporary issues likely to impact our society, culture, and lives in the years ahead. And I can't think of anyone more fitting to deliver the inaugural lecture in the Centennial Lecture Series than Dr. Jerry Porras, the Lane Professor of Organizational Behavior and Change, Emeritus, at Stanford University's Graduate School of Business. Jerry is also a proud UTEP alumnus, and during our homecoming celebrations this week, we will recognize him with UTEP's highest honor, the 2011 Distinguished Alumni Award. Jerry earned his undergraduate degree in electrical engineering from UTEP in 1960. He served briefly in the Army and then worked as an engineer for Lockheed Missiles and Space Company and General Electric before pursuing his MBA from Cornell University and his PhD in management from UCLA. In 1972, Jerry joined the faculty at Stanford and for the next 3 decades taught courses in leadership, interpersonal dynamics, and organizational development and change to students in the Graduate School of Business, MBA, and executive programs. Jerry also served as Associate Dean of Academic Affairs for the Graduate School of Business, and for 16 years he directed the school's executive program on leading and managing change. Jerry is the author of 2 books on organizational success. Built to Last, Successful Habits of Visionary Companies was co-authored with his former Stanford colleague, Jim Collins. The international bestseller, which explored the characteristics of highly successful, innovative, and long-lasting companies, became an icon of the genre. Jerry also wrote influential Stream Analysis, a powerful way to diagnose and manage organizational change, which was converted into a software tool for diagnosing, planning, and managing change within an organization. The recipient of numerous awards, Jerry's honors include the Brillante Award, presented by the National Society of Hispanic MBAs, and the 2007 Lifetime Achievement Award from Hispanic Business Magazine. Stanford University named an award in Jerry's honor, the annual Jerry Porras Latino Leadership Award, which recognizes students for visionary leadership within a student organization or university program serving the Chicano-Latino community. He continues to lecture and consult at public and private organizations across the globe. Please join me in extending a warm welcome to soon-to-be UTEP Distinguished Alumnus, Dr. Jerry Porras.
Well, thank you. It's quite an honor to be here. I have had the feeling of someone who is born and raised in a particular house and then goes away for a few years and comes back and doesn't recognize the house. As we drove into the campus, there were so many parts of it that I said, wow, that wasn't there, what was there? Well, a very small number of things were here, but it's been quite breathtaking to see the fantastic expansion. So I'm pleased to be here, and I'm very honored to have been selected for this award, and happy to be able to share some ideas with all of you and inaugurate this lecture series, which I hope will be a really fascinating one over the course of the next several years. I've titled my remarks Vision in the Great University because I think that building greatness is not an easy task, And building enduring greatness is a very, very difficult task. So I'm really interested and have been interested in what is it that makes organizations enduringly great. Why do they exist not only for a long time, so survival is kind of a first criteria, but how do they also perform at outstanding levels, and how do they really make a difference in the world in which they operate? And what do they do to cause that to happen? Because not all organizations do that. Most of my research, as President Natalicio mentioned, has been rooted in organizations, business organizations. But I think that the ideas that I'll be sharing with you are applicable not only to business organizations, but also to educational organizations, healthcare organizations, religious organizations, organizations of all types. So I'm going to propose that to you, and after you listen to the remarks, then you can sort of judge for yourselves whether you think these ideas do apply to educational organizations and universities in particular. I want to begin my remarks with the concept of vision, because it's a word that means many, many different things. And it almost means as many different things as there are people that you ask what that word means. So I'm sure that if I spent some time probing your definitions of vision, I would come up with a huge number of views as to what vision really is. Yet, it's a term that has been used very much in management thinking over the course of the last 20 years. Organizations have developed visions for themselves. People have studied what vision is. And still, I think that there's a lot of confusion about what it really means. Jim Collins and I sort of faced this reality when after we had finished our research and published the book. If you get an original copy of the Built to Last book, it has 10 chapters in it. And in those 10 chapters, I don't believe that the word vision is used at all. Not used at all. Yet the title of the book was Built to Last: Successful Habits of Visionary Companies. So he and I went out and started talking to managers about these ideas. And as you might imagine, astute managers say, well, you're talking about visionary organizations. What's vision? So when that question got asked, I would do my dance. I would dance around trying to answer that question because I didn't have an answer to it. We talked about visionary companies, but we didn't really discover anything that these companies called vision. So how could I tell people what vision was? Well, as a result of that, I started asking the question of executives that I spoke with in the various executive programs that I taught or the speeches that I gave. And I'd ask the question, what does vision do for your organization? Well, first of all, I asked the question, how many of your organizations have vision? And typically 70%, 60% of the people would raise their hands. Their organizations had a vision. I said, okay, now hold that vision in your mind if you can remember it, because most organizations' vision nobody can remember. Hold it in your mind, and let me ask you a second question. What do you think vision should do for your organization? And here I started getting a lot of answers. And I used to go up to the blackboard and I'd write all of the answers on the board. And I typically would get a list of 25, sometimes 30. I'd run out of board space. Over time, I started looking at what were the common terms or the common factors that existed across these various lists. And I came up with this list, which is a consolidated version of what it is that I heard from these managers. So they would tell me, well, look, vision should be a framework for strategy. That's what it ought to do for an organization. It ought to guide the way we develop our strategy and what our strategy contains. Well, that sounded reasonable. But then another common theme was, well, vision should be a guide for individual behavior. It ought to help tell our employees and our managers what they ought to do and what they shouldn't do. So it guides them through time and through very complicated environments. Vision should be a source of inspiration for people. It ought to make them want to be a part of our organization because we're doing stuff that they really are excited about. So it inspires them to join us in that quest. Vision should be the basis for the culture of our organization. It ought to help form the norms that exist in our organization and guide individuals in what they do. Well, vision should guide the organization. It's a compass to guide the organization over a long time period. It ought to help us kind of know which direction we're going, but not just today, not just tomorrow or a year from now, but a very long time period. So it's the compass that kind of keeps us going in the right direction. Vision should be the glue that holds our organization together. We're all held together by this common vision that we all want to accomplish the same thing together. Vision should be a source of our identity. Who are we? What makes us special? What makes us unique? Vision should help us play that role. Vision should motivate action on the part of our employees and on the part of the whole organization. It ought to help us get things done. Well, you look at this list. Look at this list. It's kind of an overwhelming list, especially if some of you are in organization or an organization that has a vision. Well, let me ask you that question. How many of you are a part of an organization that you think has a vision that you understand? Can you raise your hand? Okay, a goodly number of you. Now look at this list and be honest with yourself. You don't have to share your information, but be honest with yourself and ask yourself, how many of these requirements for vision does your organization's vision satisfy? Now, when I ask that of the typical management audience, the answer is typically 3. That they might satisfy their vision, their company's vision might satisfy 3 of these, and which 3 those are vary all over the map. It's not the same 3. So, what's happening? What's going on? You know, managers develop visions for their organizations. They go to mountaintop resorts or beachfront areas, and they spend a week developing a vision for their company. And then they come back, and they have something that, only satisfies a portion of all the things we want it to do for us. So what's wrong? Are they dumb? I don't think so. Did they not try hard? They try hard. Why don't they really know what's going on? And my answer is that they don't know what vision is. And that's what we discovered in the companies that we studied, because I got tired of doing my song and dance because it wasn't very successful when managers would ask me what vision was. But if we went back to organizations and the data that we generated in our research, and we used this list, and we asked of our data, what were these companies doing that satisfied these components? One or more of these components on this list. And out of that analysis came Chapter 11, which was the chapter we added to our book to describe what we think vision is. So I'm going to take those ideas and I'm going to try to weave them into a bigger picture of how we go about creating enduringly great organizations and the role that vision plays. And I start out with an assertion, which I think you'll probably agree with me after we go through all the ideas, is that vision is really the core driver of enduring organizational greatness. That it's really difficult to become enduringly great over a long time period, without having a clear vision of what it is that you're trying to do. So this is the driver of it. Now, I keep using these words, enduring greatness, And I'd like to define them more clearly for you. For me, enduring greatness consists of two parts. One, it's performance, and it's long-term performance, and it's outstanding long-term performance. So it's not just great performance for short periods of time, but great performance for a long time period. When I say a long time period, I'm talking 10, not 10 years, but 20 years, 30 years, 50 years. The companies we studied were on average 100 years old. Now, they didn't always perform at a great level for that 100 years, but they did for a vast majority of that period of time. So it's not just being a flash in the pan. It's being an enduring company that performs great over a long time period. So this is an important thing. If you don't perform well, it's difficult to call you a great organization. You know, you can be really jazzy and have all this appeal to it, et cetera, but unless you perform well, first of all, you're not going to last all that long, but you don't really deserve, in my opinion, to be called an enduringly great organization. So performance is the first factor. The second factor is that the organization has made a significant, and I'd like to add, and continuing contribution to the world. So you make a difference in the world. You help the world be a better, more effective place for people to live. So organizations that just make a lot of money, for example, but don't do the second part, don't really qualify, in my opinion, to be called enduringly great organizations. And of the companies we studied 36 of them. 18 of them we called visionary companies, and the other 18 were a comparison set, a matched comparison set. We found that the matched comparison performed quite well financially. They performed very well over a very long time period. They lasted just as long as the visionary companies, an average of 100 years. But they didn't make a substantial difference in the world the way the visionary companies did. The visionary companies are companies which you will all recognize today. We studied them from the time they were created and studied what they did throughout their entire history. So needless to say, we collected a lot of data on these companies. But we wanted to understand what did they do from the very time they were small and just beginning, and what did they continue doing until today, where they're very large companies. So they're companies like 3M, like IBM, Walt Disney, Hewlett-Packard, Merck, Johnson & Johnson. These are all companies whose names you recognize, and companies that have really made a difference in the world. As a final note about the differences in these companies, by the way, is that the visionary companies outperformed the marketplace by a factor of about 16 to 1 over a 70 or 80 year period. And the comparison companies outperformed the market by about a factor of 5 to 1. So the visionaries outperformed the comparisons by a factor of 3 to 1 over that same long time period. So we have outstanding performance, but we also have significant contribution to the world in which the organization operates. Okay, so if we start out with this notion then that enduring greatness is something that we're wanting to achieve, let me throw at you a sort of a very simple model. We could make it a lot more complex, but neither you nor I would probably understand it. So let me try to show you exactly kind of the essence of what I think is important to understand. In order to understand the role that vision plays in creating enduring greatness, we need to understand a broader framework. So we start out with the notion that we've got vision, and I'm going to define what vision is, okay? So whatever definition is in your head, I hope to really discombobulate it and expand it and give you a whole new view of what vision might be. But the world, in my thinking here, starts out with vision. Now, vision should guide strategy. I got a call, it's now been over a year or so back, I got a call from a chief executive officer who was all excited. I could hear his energy and excitement on the phone. And he said to me, "We've got to have you come work with us." And I said, "Well, you know, what do you want me to do?" He said, "Well, look," he said, "we just spent a week and he didn't mention it, but it was in some mountain top retreat. He said, we just spent a week developing a great strategy. I said, that's fine, that's wonderful. What do you want me for? He said, well, now we've got to develop our vision. I said, you called me a week too late. You should have done it the other way around. I can't help you. You've already kind of gone down that path. So vision guides strategy. Strategy is kind of easier to develop. We have much more training on what strategy is as leaders and managers. So people gravitate to that, but unless they have a clear-cut vision, then the strategy is just driven by a lot of things that are implicit and often not very clearly defined and sometimes contradictory with each other. So that's why a lot of strategies wind up not working. So vision drives strategy. Now, the two of them, vision and strategy, help you decide how you're going to change your work setting. I call it work setting realignment. Now, why is this important? Well, in my analysis of psychological explanations for why people behave the way they do and what might cause change in their behavior, I see that there are sort of two big clusters of explanations as to why people behave the way they do. If you ask yourself that question, why do people behave the way they do? Ask yourself and come up with some answers really quickly for yourself. You'll probably find that if we were able to get all your answers up on the wall here, that your answers will be clustered in two big groups. One set of answers revolves around things that are inside the skin of the individual. Their motives, their aspirations, their personality, their habits, their desires, things like that. That's why they behave the way they do. And another set of factors are outside of the skin of the individual, and if we consider it in an organization, there are things like what the boss tells you to do, and how much money you get paid, and what you're measured for doing, and what the culture of the organization is like, so what's valued, what's not valued, what are the norms like. That these things, what your coworkers say you ought to do, that these things drive behavior. So they're the inside your skin things and the outside your skin things. So if you think of yourselves as managers, and you ask yourself, you're managing an organization and you're trying to improve and change people's behavior, which of those two sets of drivers of change do you have most control over? Well, it's obvious then. You're not going to be able to get inside of my head and tell me, Jerry, that aspiration's no good, you got to change it. You're not going to change my values. You're not going to change my motives or my drives. What's inside of your head is inside of your head, and that's who you are, and you can't do much about it. It's kind of like your children. You can't do much about them. They're the way they are. So I say, stop paying attention to that. But so many books on managing and so talk about getting inside people's motives and changing their motivation and so on. I think that that's a lot of wasted energy. Where I think managers should focus their time is on what's outside of the skin. And that's what's inside of the work setting of the organization. This is where people work. So the way you pay them and what you pay them for doing will affect their behavior. What their coworkers say will affect their behavior. The way the managers deal with them will affect their behavior. So all of these things outside of the work setting, I think, are the main drivers of behavior that managers can do something about. You can change the structure. You can change the systems. You can change the way jobs are designed. And change a job so that it's not a job designed so that a monkey could do it, but a job designed so that someone with some intelligence could do it. And that's going to create better performance than the monkey designed job. So managers can control and affect all of those things. And so I tell them, focus on those things. And that's the work setting. So when you understand what your vision is, and you understand what your strategy is, then you can begin to focus on what's my work setting like, and what behaviors is it driving, and what behaviors is it blocking. If I have some behaviors that are very important for my organization to be successful, I don't want them blocked. But it could be that there are designs in my organization that block those behaviors. And as you think of the organizations you work in, you can probably identify a whole lot of these things that block you from doing what you really should be doing to be a more effective employee, a more effective manager, more effective worker. So that work setting is really kind of where it's all at for changing behavior. And the way you decide what behaviors you want is which behaviors will help us achieve our vision, which behaviors will help us execute our strategy. As we identify those behaviors, and you could come up with a list of 1,000, but I encourage you to come up with a list of 10 or so that are the most critical behaviors. If we don't have these behaviors in our organization, we're not going to be successful in achieving our vision or executing that strategy. This then leads to enduring greatness. Now, this is sort of a simplified version. There's more complexities, but I think if you kind of keep this in mind, this could be helpful to you in deciding what sorts of things you might want to do in helping to improve your organization and maybe move more toward the idea of enduring greatness. Okay, so let's focus on really the core of all this, what's really the essence, and that's the idea of vision. Now, in order for me to talk about vision, I want to create a metaphor. And the metaphor that I'd like to use is something that probably all of you do every weekend, and that is go out sailing. People say, how could a guy from El Paso talk about sailing, I don't think I saw a body of water bigger than the trickle in the Rio Grande until I was about 14 years old. So, but anyway, the sailing metaphor really helps me in trying to describe what it is that I want to do. Let me give you a little caveat, though. As maybe you do or do not know, my undergraduate degree here was in electrical engineering. And one of the very first things I learned as an electrical engineering student was that if you couldn't draw it, you didn't understand it. Okay. And there was a Professor Decker here, who some of you may remember, he was a long time ago, who was incredible at drawing. He was my hero. He could walk up to a blackboard, pull out his chalk, and go, zip, draw a perfect circle. And I'd never figured out how he could draw that perfect circle every time, but he was able to do that. So I walked away from my experience having learned a lot of things, but one of the key things was that if you can't draw it, you don't understand it. So I like to draw things out and have little pictures. That's the good news. The bad news is my drawing expertise peaked at the age of 7. So you know what you're going to get. All right? So let's think of a little sailboat out in the sea. And this sailboat is the organization. And this sailboat is in a turbulent environment. Organizations are in turbulent environments. Things are always happening in their environment that are buffeting them and pushing them in a variety of directions. So in the little sailboat analogy, I forgot. The sailboat has to have a captain. And that's you. You're the leader of this little sailboat. And you got to have a captain's hat. So you're trying to get somewhere. You're trying to guide your organization someplace. But you're in this turbulent environment, so the waves are pushing you in one direction and the wind is blowing in another direction. The rain's coming down on you and buffeting you in a third direction. So you got to watch it. You got to watch out where you're going. And it's not easy to sail in this turbulent environment. And if we think about organizations, we think about universities, they've got governments pushing them in certain ways. They've got the financial communities pushing in other ways. They've got the students pushing them in third ways. I mean, they're buffeted by a lot of forces, a lot of different forces. And the public institutions have the legislatures that are coming in and trying to make them be something. So they've got to deal with all of these forces acting on them. Organizations are in turbulent environments. So how do you get any place? How do you get any place? Are you successful in this type of a world? Well, if we continue with our little sailboat analogy, oh, I'm sorry, I can't forget the hat there. You first of all need to have a star. Sailboats out in the ocean, this is before GPS, okay? So this is pre-high tech. You have to have a star out in the distance that guides you. And you anchor on that star, and it tells you where you are in relationship to that star, but that star can help you get someplace. In the world of vision, that star I call the purpose. The purpose of the organization. I'm going to go into more depth about what these things mean, but let me very quickly say the purpose of the organization is its reason for existence. Why does it exist? Now, for those of you who might be business people in the audience, the reason for existence may pop into your head right away, and you'll say, to make a lot of money. Surprisingly enough, we found that in these great organizations, that was not their reason for existence. They made a lot of money, but that wasn't the reason that they thought they existed. I'll say more about that. Now, because you've got all of these forces buffeting your little sailboat, you can't sail in a straight line toward that star. I learned that from one of my California friends. You've got to do what? You got to tack. So you tack back and forth in the direction of the purpose. Now, you notice I put these little letters, B-H-A-G, at the end of each tack point. We call these big, hairy, audacious goals. Jim Collins and I had big arguments about this label. He's more of a marketer than I am. I'm more of an academic, and I said, ooh, that's a little bit too, off the edge. Oh, no, it'll be perfect. So we argued it and tested it out, and so we kept it. Now, a big, hairy, audacious goal is a stretching, challenging, very difficult goal that you want to achieve. And once you achieve it, and by the way, this is not a goal you achieve in a year or two. Typically, these are goals that you achieve in, depending on the environment that you're in and how rapidly it's changing, but you achieve them in 5 years, maybe 10 years. Universities, it's probably 10 to 20 years. But these are goals that really stretch you. They stretch the organization, and they excite you, and we'll say more about them. But once you achieve it, then you set another one, and you move toward it. And on and on. And that's what life is in managing an effective, enduringly great organization. Achieving these incredible goals, and then setting another one and achieving it, and then another one. All guided by the purpose. They're all moving you toward the purpose. None of these goals would pull you in a direction away from the purpose. So that's the purpose of purpose. Is it helps you keep these goals in track. Now there's a third major component, and this major component helps you limit what these goals might be, and limit them from the perspective of the behaviors that would be demanded of people in order to achieve that goal. And I call these limits the core values. The core values of the organization. The core values define the most critical perspective that the organization has about what it's okay to do and what it's not okay to do. And core values should set limits on the BHAGs that you create. And let me give you a quick example of that. Has anybody heard of a little company called Enron? What happened at Enron? We're in California and we're far away, so you all here in Texas and you're far away too, because I guess they're in Houston, or weren't they? So it is incredible to think about Enron, and automatically reached the conclusion that Enron was loaded with a lot of crooks, a lot of shady characters. Well, as I thought about that, I said, I can't believe that's the case. There's something going on here that's more complicated that can help explain why people did what they did. And remember, I'm a believer in the environment really driving behaviors a lot. So if you look at Enron, and I did a little bit of looking at them. I didn't do a lot of in-depth looking, but I did a little bit of looking, and I found a document that contained a list of their core values. Enron had a list of core values. Guess what was number one on the list? Integrity. You got it. Integrity was number one on the list. I don't know if they were in rank order in terms of priority, but it was the first one on the list. So I said, okay, integrity is their core value. Now, what happened at Enron? Well, Enron's leaders, the top managers, began to set incredibly challenging, stretching BHAGs. They didn't call them that, but they set these goals that you had to generate certain levels of revenues in very sort of limited periods of time. And for a while, you could do that, or the company members, the people who had to execute these plans, were doing it. They were achieving these really exciting goals, and the leaders then said, oh, great, now let's set more stretching goals. So the goals kept getting more and more stretching until, in order to achieve the goal, people had to start doing illegal things. Because the goal couldn't be achieved any other way. It was too stretching. So they started doing off-the-books stuff and other things that, I don't know all about them. You couldn't achieve that goal unless you started doing these illegal things. So this is an example of setting a BHAG that required such behaviors that were so extreme that you begin to violate the core values. The core value of integrity had to be violated if we were going to achieve this goal. Now the managers there, the senior managers, then really stacked the deck. Because what they did is they laid on top of these really stretching goals, they laid incredibly large rewards. So not only would you now be rewarded in tens of thousands of dollars as a bonus, but it became hundreds of thousands of dollars as a bonus, and then millions of dollars as a bonus. And so you had people driven by this incredibly large bonus structure to achieve goals that in order to achieve them, you had to violate the value of integrity. So what do you think happened? They did it. They did it. So my view is there were a lot of kind of good people who were driven by the environment that was created in that organization to do bad things. And so that's the role that core values can play in the relationship to big, hairy, audacious goals, is that they will help you define those goals and maybe limit those goals in such a way that they don't require behaviors that violate what you really believe are your basic principles. So all three of these things play together. They come together to create what we're calling vision. So vision is not this simple little, well, it's my dream of the future, which many people think that that's what vision is, or we're going to accomplish that. But vision is this combination. And I'm saying that because that's what we said, that's what we found our data telling us. Our data was saying, look, these are the things these companies did to guide themselves over a long time period, purpose, to really help define behavior, core values, to help achieve and motivate people and change, the BHAGs, and the three things together is what guided these organizations. And for us, the conclusion out of that was that is what vision is. So if we then take that as the broad framework, let me quickly go through some more detail as to what each of these three parts is, and then we'll close. Okay. First of all, let's look at purpose up at the top. Purpose is the organization's enduring reason for existence. As I said, why do you exist? From the organizational perspective is, why not shut the place down? From the individual's perspective, why am I giving my blood, sweat, and tears to this place? Why am I working 12 hours a day and worrying about all the things that are going on here? Because this organization is doing something I think is important that I really want to do, want to help it do. In the companies we studied, some of the purpose statements were very simple. Disney, to make people happy. That was their purpose. That is their purpose. It dictates the businesses that they're in and not in. If you ask the question, how could a company who started out making cartoons for kids also be in the business of running a cruise line and still be the same company? Those two things don't seem to fit together unless you look at the fact that their purpose is to make people happy. And all the businesses that they're in, they started with the cartoons, and they made motion pictures that were full-length cartoons, like Snow White, and then they made motion pictures with people, and then they created the Anaheim Mighty Ducks hockey team. So if you like to see people fight, you're happy. They bought the Anaheim Angels baseball team. They bought ESPN TV. And then now the latest thing was the cruise line. The theme throughout all those businesses is making people happy. So purpose is not just some idle set of words that you put up there. They really need to guide decision-making and major decision-making. And what business you're in is a pretty major decision for any company. So purpose is why we exist. And by the way, it ought to affect behavior. HP's purpose is to make technical contributions. Purpose statements, by the way, I have found if they're more than about 9 words, nobody remembers them. So they tend to be short. So people can remember them. If you can't remember them, they're not guiding anybody's behavior or decision making. So with HP, make technical contributions. They got out of businesses where they could make, or they never got into businesses where they could not make a technical contribution. Like they didn't get in the clone business for the IBM clone PC computer business for a very long time because they couldn't see any technical contribution in it, although they could make a lot of money. They got out of the watch business. They used to make an incredible, when electronic watches first were invented, they had this incredible electronic watch that had a calculator on it. It would do all these engineering calculations. It was great. But they couldn't sell it for the price they had to sell it for how much it cost them to make it. So they got out of the business. It's guided their decision-making about what is it that we do and what is it that we don't do. So purpose should play a key role in helping define your future and the decisions you make about what it is that you do. The key test, or let me say this, the key failure of purpose statements that I've seen is if they describe what you do, not why you do what you do. Okay, get the difference? It's a big difference. Most companies that I've seen their mission statements, they call them, they don't use the word purpose, mission statements, and they show them to me, and it's typically a description of what they do. We provide state-of-the-art software solutions for the banking industry. That's what you're doing. It's not why you're doing that. So I always ask the question, well, why are you doing that? And when people leaders and managers of organizations start to ask themselves a question, well, why are we doing what we're doing? Then they start getting at what their purpose is and getting at a more fundamental contribution that you're making. So that's, if you come up with a purpose statement, or if your organization has a mission statement, test it that way. If I ask the question, why am I doing that? Why are we doing that as an organization? You'll begin to understand whether you really have a final purpose statement or not. Okay, let's look at core values, which is the next area. And core values are really the small number of very important guiding tenets for our behavior. We only found between 3 and 5 in the companies we studied. You can't have a long list of core values, in my opinion, and expect them to last for 100 years. Because enough of the world changes that a lot of those values might not be relevant anymore. But the small fundamental set will be relevant no matter what the environment is like. And that's what these companies demonstrated to us. That they had values that guided them from the time they were beginning to today, 100 years plus later. So values are a small set. They're not to be confused with cultural practices or strategic values, which are values you might adopt to help you execute a particular strategy. But they're values that are there, enduring, and relevant forever. And for a business organization, they're not to be compromised for financial gain and for everybody or any sort of short-term expediency. This is the ultimate test of a core value. The ultimate test is, did we live that value and suffered in some way for doing so? That's the ultimate test. In my mind, you might say you have a value that guides you, but unless it's tested in some way where you suffer by living that value, it's just words, in my opinion. So companies create lists of values, and I always ask the question, okay, give me some examples of your having lived that value and lost a customer, lost some money, lost an opportunity, had to pay out something. And if they can't come up with an answer like that, then I say, well, then it's an aspirational core value, but it's not a real one until you're able to really demonstrate that you suffered some way for living that value. So core values guide the organization from the point of view of what's okay to do and what's not okay to do. And remember Enron and integrity. It was not just something written on a piece of paper. You've got to really be able to live it. Then the final area, the BHAGs. The BHAG is a challenging, exciting, highly motivating, easily communicated, substantial goal achievable within a given time frame. And that last part, by the way, the given time frame, is something that many, many organizations omit. Let me give you the perfect example of a BHAG that we did not find in our companies, but we we knew it because we were alive in the early 1960s, when President Kennedy said, our goal is to land a man on the moon and get him back by the end of the decade. That was the goal that he set for NASA and, in essence, kind of the whole country. Now, think about that goal in the context of this description. It has it all. It has it all. And it inspired and it motivated a huge number of people to do superhuman things and actually achieve that goal before the deadline. But big, hairy, audacious goals are a very powerful way to drive change. And I think that UTEP has the big, hairy, audacious goal, I put that label on it, of Tier 1. It fits this in my mind, except I didn't see a deadline. That is a challenging goal. One of the key characteristics of these goals as we studied the companies that used them was that when people set the goal, when the managers set the goal, they didn't know how they were going to achieve it. They didn't say in their minds, well, we do this and we do this, we do this, we'll get to the goal. They didn't know how they were going to do it. Now, those of you who are managers know that that's scary. If you don't know how you're going to do something, you're out of control. Managers like to be in control. But really powerful BHAGs, you don't know the way you're going to achieve it. You just have the confidence that you're going to find out how to do it. And it's not just you, but it's your whole organization. And this helps mobilize and really bond the organization together because they're all working together to achieve that goal. We did not know how we were going to do it to get a man on the moon and get him back by the end of the decade. We didn't have the technologies. We had to develop them. And it wasn't clear the paths that we needed to take to get there. But they were discovered because people were all committed to that goal. One of the best ways to drive changes in an organization is through BHAGs that people are committed to, that people all the way up and down the organization are committed to. That's the best way to drive change, because you're not going to achieve the goal by just working harder or faster or longer hours. You're going to also have to do new things. And that's what change is, doing new things or things in new ways. So BHAGs are very powerful at driving change, and I think that you can see it here in this university, that they've driven, and that BHAG has driven a lot of substantial change. So if we then go back to our overall model, we can see the various components to it, and that all together they describe the guiding vision, the idea that's going to help define our strategy and help us to understand how we have to realign our organization. So if we go back then to the reasons that people want vision, go back to this list, and we see this list, and then because I'm an engineer and I'm anal about it, I had to create a matrix that describes all of the components of what we want out of vision, and then the components of the framework, and has a little X showing where I think each of these components satisfies one of those needs. Vision, then, is really at the basis for creating enduring greatness. If you don't start out with a fantastic vision, one you've put some work into, one you really thought out, one you really believe in, I don't think you'll be able to achieve enduring greatness. You may be great for a little while, be more of a flash in the pan, but for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, I think that the data show us that this is the way it gets done. Thank you. I'm open for questions.
There are companies that have grown very rapidly, and then they seem, as they get large and very effective, they sometimes run into trouble trying to make the transition of being a very large company. Do you have any comments on this process?
Well, in the context of these ideas, I think what happens is that those companies, by and large, don't have these principles really clearly in their minds. Well, Apple is my pet example right now. With Steve Jobs' death, clearly there's been a lot of discussion in our local newspapers as well as the national ones about Steve Jobs and Apple and his type of leadership and so on. Apple, to me, is really an unclear example of exactly what type of company it's going to become, whether it's going to be one of these enduringly great companies or whether it's going to be sort of more of the flash-in-the-pan type of company. If you look at Apple's history, it was going like that. Steve Jobs was leading it. He leaves, goes like that. He comes back, goes like that. And now he's gone for good. And what's going to happen to Apple? The answer to that question, in my opinion, lies in what kind of a leader was Steve Jobs. Clearly he was charismatic, and people call him visionary, and they use all these incredible accolades about him. And I think he was all of that. The question in my mind is, in addition to being all that, was he also a builder of a great organization? Did he build a great organization? Did he build into his organization the capabilities to do all the things that he was doing? And if he did, then Apple, in my mind, could well become one of these companies. If he did not, and it's very, very difficult for a charismatic, visionary leader, walk on water, glow in the dark, fantastic guy or woman, to really build a great organization. Because people come to them for all the answers. What are we going to do? What's the new product? Is this good enough? Is this design okay? And he was hands-on, as all reports are. So did he develop the capabilities in people in the company, and did he put in the structures to make all this fantastic inventiveness continue after he was gone and wasn't there to push it? I don't know the answer to that. I'm skeptical because, people have egos, and if you're larger than life, your ego is probably larger than life also, and you love for people to come and ask you questions and rely on you for answers and always say, you're the man. So when you're doing that, you're not building a great organization. You're not building into it the capabilities to do the things necessary to be highly successful and make a difference in the world. So if he did that, and a lot of that is hidden because of his bright glowing star, then I think he was a great leader, in my mind a totally great leader, an enduringly great leader. If he didn't do it, he was just a great leader. He was great while he was here, and he did a lot of things, had a big impact, no question, but in terms of his organization, the jury's out. Yes?
Size, relative size. The principles you present are applicable to small business. You can have greatness in building a small business. Could you address that?
Absolutely. You have to remember that all the companies we studied were small businesses at one point in time. And they were doing these things when they were brand new and starting up. We talked to Bill Hewlett when he and David Packard were starting HP. We said, okay, Bill, what were you and Dave doing when you started, what were you thinking about when you started HP? And he said, look, we were a couple of young guys. We just graduated from Stanford. We thought we were pretty smart, which is, by the way, something that afflicts a lot of Stanford graduates. And he said, and we wanted to make a contribution. And so we said, well, what kind of contribution did you want to make? He said, we wanted to make a technical contribution. A technical contribution. And like I said earlier, when you look at the history of HP, that's what they've been about. Now, they have gone astray in the last 10 years because they violated some of the things that made them great. And especially it's around leadership. But I have a belief in that company, and I think they're going to come back. Because as an entity, the company has really, I think, been a great company. And a lot of its greatness comes from the fact that they started out talking about what's our purpose. They didn't use that word purpose. We wanted to get in business together, and we wanted to make a technical contribution. That's the way he phrased it. But they started out with that. They created the Hewlett-Packard way. That's a list of their core values. Respect for people. I mean, this list there is what guided them, and it was from the very beginning. And it was part of the organization, and they didn't start calling it the Hewlett-Packard way until they were like 20 or 25 years old, and they started getting big. This is moving from small to big. They started getting bigger, your question too, and they said, we've got to codify this. And now everybody knows it, but now we're getting so big that we can't talk to everybody as frequently as we were before, so we've got to codify it. So they created a written list, and called it the Hewlett-Packard way. So doing that sort of thing, embedding these ideas in the organization as you grow bigger and bigger and bigger, is one way to transition from a large to a big. But that means you've got to have these ideas going on in your company even though you're small. They need to be guiding you from the beginning. And that's how you make the transition, in my mind, more smoothly, and then keep getting bigger and bigger. Yes, question?
Yeah, if you started talking, there's, when you take a look at core values as the impetus of guiding your behavior, you touched upon how that ties into purpose.
Right.
How good a job do these companies do in valuing the notion of value as benefits and value as outcomes in terms of either their purpose or where they're going?
Well, I think the job that they do is really rooted in whether the behavior of the leadership, and I mean leadership from the top to the bottom leadership, is consistent with the values. If the behavior is not consistent with the values, and you've got these incredible lists of values on the walls, and and you give everybody a plastic card they have to carry in their wallet so they won't forget the values. If that's what it's all about, it's trivial. It doesn't work because people see the behavior of the leaders, and they see the behavior to be consistent with what you espouse the values to be or not. So their behavior is the most significant way that they show that the importance of the values and whether they ought to be followed or not. And then the demonstration of, hey, we're willing to make tough decisions. We've got a star salesperson, but one of the values we have is collaboration in our organization. And this star salesperson is kind of stabbing people in the back, running rampant, but boy, that person brings in revenue like you can't believe. What are we going to do with them? If you really believe your values, you fire them. If you don't believe your values, you keep them because you value the money more, and people see that. Yeah. Okay. Yes, question.
Yes, what example could you give for a good BHAG for a college or university?
I think you have one here.
Pardon?
I think you have one here.
Well,
Become
I'm
a
thinking
tier
of-
one institution.
Well, a community college, say.
Oh my gosh. Well, I think some BHAGs would revolve around how many students you might graduate, or the makeup, the profile of your student body. If it doesn't reflect the environment you're in, that would be another one. Gosh, I'm at a loss to come up with something that has me jumping up and down, because that's what you need to do. You need to find something that has everyone jumping up and down to say, yeah, we're going to achieve it. I mean, another might be if there is some sort of rating scheme of junior colleges in terms of their performance and along some dimensions, that you're going to be number one by some year. People like to be number one, so that can often get people excited. But whatever it is that you come up with, it's important to develop something that would excite people all the way up and down the organization. And I heard a wonderful story about the moon, the goal of the moon. And it turns out that there was a researcher at Stanford who was doing some technical research, and he needed a special piece of equipment that at that time only NASA had. So he contacted NASA, and NASA said, yeah, you can use it. It's located in a factory in Virginia. And by the way, we're using it during the daytime, so you can only use it between midnight and 8 in the morning. So he said, okay, I'll go to Virginia and I'll use it then. So he did, and he was wandering around the plant, a little bit before midnight, and he bumps into the janitor. And he asked for directions because he didn't know where the lab was, and the janitor gave him directions. And because nobody else was around, he starts chatting with the janitor, and as they were chatting, he asked the janitor, well, what do you do here? And the janitor says, I'm helping to get a man on the moon. Okay? That's the type of core value, of BHAG you need to create. Yes, I don't know who was next, but.
So you create a new BHAG. How do you get the folks who are the naysayers and don't believe in it on board to work into the same direction and go after that BHAG?
Yeah.
What do the enduring companies do to make that happen?
Yeah, well, that's certainly a real challenge. The bulk of it is that there are enough people enthused about it and energized by it, and the whole organization sort of begins to modify itself to achieve this value, that naysayers, kind of a couple of things can happen, or several things can happen to them. One of them is they'll go underground and they'll try to sabotage it because they don't believe in it. A second is that they'll change their mind and say, okay, although I'm not 100% committed to this, I'm 80%, and that's good enough. Or you fire them because they're getting in the way. I mean, it's an organizational goal, and you've got that level of commitment to it. So the idea then of saying, okay, well, it's not that important, we'll change it because you don't like it, just doesn't work. I mean, people then will say, well, we're not committed to this. Well, why should I work my tail off to make it happen? Yeah. Okay. Yes.
In looking at your model for enduring greatness, what are the signs that indicate that perhaps the vision itself needs to be readdressed?
The whole vision? Or what part of the vision?
Could
This
be.
is a test, because all three things are vision.
At what point, when your BHAGs begin to violate your core values,
Yeah.
or they don't seem to go toward the vision, do you re-examine some of the basic outlines of that company?
The very first indication you get, these the leaders at Enron, I think, would have gotten as much trouble as they did if in the very first indication that, look, the goals that we've set are causing people to start doing some weird things. Let's find out what's starting to happen, and let's stop it. So you got to move fast, the very first inkling that you get that the values are being violated. There will be there are thoughtful people in all organizations, and I'm sure that there were some people at Enron that were saying, look, this goal it's causing us to do stupid things. We shouldn't do it. It's too much. Listen to those people. Listen to the naysayers. Be open to that sort of feedback, because if you're not, then you can run into the same trouble that they did. Yeah. Final question.
Okay, thank you. Does vision come from an individual thinking, or does it come from group thinking? I think I would argue that it comes from an individual, and strategy comes from group thinking.
It depends on what stage in life the organization is. In the early stages, like you've got a founder, and the founder has a belief in something. They want to make some sort of contribution. They've got an idea about a product or a service or software or something, and they're really committed to it, and they're excited about it, and then they have a way of being. They have their own values. And so then they start recruiting other people who get excited about it. So that causes the people that are joining you to all be consistent. And so as you grow and get bigger, the only thing that's going to change, the purpose isn't going to change, and the core values aren't going to change, but the goals are going to change. And the goals are typically all over the map from what we saw. Sometimes the leader set the goal. Sometimes somebody else set the goal or suggested the goal, and the leader liked it, and they carried it forward. And sometimes it was a sort of the senior management team getting together and setting the goal. So that can be, any of those sort of three possibilities. So no one way seemed to work well. But at the very beginning, when you're founding the company and putting it together, it really is in whoever the founder is, or if it's more than one, that couple or three founders. They kind of see enough of the world the same way that they were willing to bond together and make something happen. Where trouble often occurs is that they haven't communicated what they're trying to accomplish with each other well enough, and as it starts to get clearer what's going to be accomplished, some of the people say, hey, wait a minute, I didn't want to do that. This wasn't worth 80 hours, 90 hours a week of my time to do this. I'm going to go do something else, and they leave. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.
Okay, so UTEP has a big BHAG this weekend. We have to beat Colorado State in football. And so to do that, we need everybody at the game and everybody in orange, and that includes you, of course. So here is your official UTEP fan T-shirt.
Just my color. Thank you so much.